Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Here we are out in Regent's Park doing some more reading.
Stop reading.
Sorry. Russell Square. God, how could I get it wrong? Russell Square. We're feeling very colorful today,
Yeah.
as you can see. So we're going to read from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we'll start with the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Okay, so it's Canto 1, Chapter 18, Text 20. The chapter is Parikshit cursed by a Brahmana boy. So this is text 20. It is now ascertained that he, the personality of Godhead, is unlimited and there is none equal to him. Consequently, no one can speak of him adequately. Great demigods cannot obtain the favour of the goddess of fortune even by prayers. But this very goddess renders service unto the Lord, although he is unwilling to have such service. Purport. The personality of Godhead, or the Parameshwara Parabrahman, according to the Shruti, has nothing to do. He has no equal, nor does anyone excel him. He has unlimited potencies, and his every action is carried out systematically in his natural and perfect ways. Thus, the Supreme Personality of God is full in himself, and he has nothing to accept from anyone else, including the great demigods like Brahma. Others ask for the favour of the goddess of fortune, and despite such prayers, she declines to award such favours. But still she renders service unto the personality of Godhead, although he has nothing to accept from her. The personality of Godhead, in his Garbhodakshay Vishnu feature, begets Brahma, the first created person in the material world, from his navel lotus stem, and not in the womb of the goddess of fortune, who is eternally engaged in his service. These are some of the instances of his complete independence and perfection. That he has nothing to do does not mean that he is impersonal. He is transcendentally so full of inconceivable potencies that simply by his willing everything is done, without physical or personal endeavour. He is called therefore Yogeshwara, or the Lord of all mystic powers.
Text 21. Who can be worthy of the name of the Supreme Lord but the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna? Brahmaji collected the water emanating from the nails of his feet in order to award it to Lord Shiva as a worshipful welcome. This very water, the Ganges, is purifying the whole universe, including Lord Shiva. Purport. The conception of many gods in the Vedic literatures by the ignorant is completely wrong. The Lord is one without a second, but he expands himself in many ways, and this is confirmed in the Vedas. Such expansions of the Lord are limitless, but some of them are the living entities. The living entities are not as powerful as the Lord's plenary expansions, and therefore there are two different types of expansions. Lord Brahma is generally one of the living entities, and Lord Shiva is the medium between the Lord and the living entities. In other words, even demigods like Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, who are the chief amongst all demigods, are never equal to or greater than Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, and all-powerful demigods like Brahma and Shiva are engaged in the worship of Vishnu or Lord Krishna. Therefore, who can be more powerful than Mukunda, Lord Krishna, to be factually called the Supreme Personality of Godhead? The goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Ji, Lord Brahma, and Lord Shiva are not independently powerful. They are powerful as expansions of the Supreme Lord, and all of them are engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, and so also are the living entities. There are 4 sects of worshipful deities of the Lord, and the chief amongst them are the Brahma Sampradaya, Rudra Sampradaya, and Shri Sampradaya, descending directly from Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, respectively. Besides the above-mentioned 3 Sampradayas, there is the Kumara Sampradaya, descending from Sanat Kumar, All of the four original sampradayas are still scrupulously engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord up to date, and they all declare that Lord Krishna, Mukunda, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and no other personality is equal to him or greater than him.
Text 22. Self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna can all of a sudden give up the world of material attachment, including the gross and subtle mind, and go away to attain the highest perfection of the renounced order of life, by which non-violence and renunciation are consequential. Purport. Only the self-control can gradually be attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Self-control means not indulging in sense enjoyment more than is necessary, and those who are not self-controlled are given over to sense enjoyment. Dry philosophical speculation is the subtle sense enjoyment of the mind. Sense enjoyment leads one to the path of darkness. Those who are self-controlled can make progress on the path of liberation from the conditional life of material existence. The Vedas therefore enjoin that one should not go on the path of darkness, but should make a progressive march towards the path of light or liberation. Self-control is actually achieved not by artificially stopping the senses from material enjoyment, but by becoming factually attached to the Supreme Lord by engaging one's unalloyed senses in the transcendental service of the Lord. The senses cannot be forcibly curbed, but they can be given proper engagement. Purified senses, therefore, are always engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. This perfectional stage of sense enjoyment is called Bhakti Yoga. So those who are attached to the means of Bhakti Yoga are factually self-controlled and can all of a sudden give up their homely or bodily attachment for the service of the Lord. This is called the Paramahamsa stage. Hamsas or swans accept only milk out of a mixture of milk and water. Similarly, those who accept the service of the Lord instead of Maya's service are called the Paramahamsas. They are naturally qualified of all the good attributes such as pridelessness, freedom from vanity, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, respectability, worship, devotion, and sincerity. All these godly qualities exist in the devotee of the Lord spontaneously. Such Paramahamsas who are completely given up to the service of the Lord are very rare. They are very rare even amongst the liberated souls. Real non-violence means freedom from envy. In this world, everyone is envious of his fellow being. But a perfect Paramahamsa, being completely given up to the service of the Lord, is perfectly non-envious. He loves every living being in relation with the Supreme Lord. Real renunciation means perfect dependence on God. Every living being is dependent on someone else because he is so made. Actually, everyone is dependent in mercy of the Supreme Lord. And when one forgets... But when one forgets his relation with the Lord, he becomes dependent on the conditions of material nature. Renunciation means renouncing one's dependence on the conditions of material nature and thus becoming completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord. Real independence means complete faith in the mercy of the Lord without dependence on the conditions of matter. This Paramahamsa stage is the highest perfectional stage in Bhakti Yoga, the process of devotional service to the Supreme Lord.
Very nice. Especially like this part. Renunciation means renouncing one's dependence on the conditions of material nature and thus becoming completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord. 23. O Rishis, who are as powerfully pure as the sun, I shall try to describe to you the transcendental pastimes of Vishnu as far as my knowledge is concerned. As the birds fly in the sky as far as their capacity allows, so do the learned devotees describe the Lord as far as their realization allows. Purport. The Supreme Absolute Truth is unlimited. No living being can know about the unlimited by his limited capacity. The Lord is impersonal, personal, and localized. By his impersonal feature, he is all-pervading Brahman. By his localized feature, he is present in everyone's heart as the Supreme Soul. And by his ultimate personal feature, he is the object of transcendental loving service by his fortunate associates, the pure devotees. The pastimes of the Lord in different features can only be estimated partly by the great learned devotees. So, Srila Sutta Goswami has rightly taken this position in describing the pastimes of the Lord as far as he has realized. Factually, only the Lord himself can describe himself, and his learned devotee also can describe him as far as the Lord gives him the power of description.
Text 24 and 25.
This must be a good one.
Once upon a time, Maharaj Parikshit, while engaged in hunting in the forest with bow and arrows, became extremely fatigued, hungry and thirsty while following the stags. While searching for a reservoir of water, he entered the hermitage of the well-known Shamika Rishi and saw the sage sitting silently with eyes closed.
This is a really, really powerful verse and purport that explains why bad things happen and how we should see misfortune or unpredictable things that happen in our life somehow as the mercy of the Lord.
Purport. The Supreme Lord is so kind to his pure devotees that in proper time he calls such devotees up to him and thus creates an auspicious circumstance for the devotee. Maharaj Parikshit was a pure devotee of the Lord, and there was no reason for him to become extremely fatigued, hungry and thirsty, because a devotee of the Lord never becomes perturbed by such bodily demands. But by the desire of the Lord, even such a devotee can become apparently fatigued and thirsty just to create a situation favorable for his renunciation of worldly activities. One has to give up all attachment for worldly relations before one is able to go back to Godhead. And thus, when a devotee is too much absorbed in worldly affairs, the Lord creates a situation to cause indifference. The Supreme Lord never forgets his pure devotee, even though he may be engaged in so-called worldly affairs. Sometimes he creates an awkward situation, and the devotee becomes obliged to renounce all worldly affairs. The devotee can understand by the signal of the Lord, but others take it to be unfavorable and frustrating. Maharaj Parikshit was to become the medium for the revelation of Srimad Bhagavatam by Lord Sri Krishna, as his grandfather Arjuna was the medium for the Bhagavad Gita. Had Arjuna not been taken up with an illusion of family affection by the will of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita would not have been spoken by the Lord himself for the good of all concerned. Similarly, had Maharaj Parikshit not been fatigued, hungry and thirsty at this time, Srimad Bhagavatam would not have been spoken by Srila Sukadeva Goswami, the prime authority of Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is a prelude to the circumstances under which Srimad Bhagavatam is spoken for the benefit of all concerned. The prelude therefore begins with the words, once upon a time.
Famous, once upon a time. But this is a really interesting and important point, that sometimes what seems like apparently unfavorable circumstances is the Lord using his devotee in order to make a point or to create a circumstance where something wonderful can happen. But it's challenging, because if the Lord wants you to move and you think you're doing the right thing, but it's not about what you think, it's actually about what the Lord wants. So it's not always so easy to see. So like that. Anyway, interesting. Text 26. The Muni's sense organs, breath, mind, and intelligence were all restrained from material activities, and he was situated in a trance apart from the three, wakefulness, dream, and unconsciousness, having achieved a transcendental position qualitatively equal with the Supreme Absolute. Purport. It appears that the Muni in whose hermitage the king entered was in yogic trance. The transcendental position is attained by three processes, namely the process of Gyan, or theoretical knowledge of transcendence, the process of Yoga, or factual realization of trance by manipulation of the physiological and psychological functions of the body, and the most approved process of Bhakti Yoga, or the engagement of the senses, in the devotional service of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, also we have the information of the gradual development of perception from matter to a living entity. Our material mind and body develop from the living entity, the soul. And being influenced by the three qualities of matter, we forget our real identity. The Gyan process theoretically speculates about the reality of the soul. But Bhakti Yoga factually engages the spirit soul in activities. The perception of matter is transcended to still subtler states of the senses. The senses are transcended to the subtler mind, and then to breathing activities, and gradually to intelligence. Beyond the intelligence, the living soul is realized by the mechanical activities of the yoga system, or practice of meditation, restraining the senses. Regulating the breathing system and applying intelligence to rise to the transcendental position. This trance stops all material activities of the body. The king saw the Muni in that position. He also saw the Muni as follows.
Text 27. The sage in meditation was covered by the skin of a stag, and long compressed hair was scattered all over him. The king, whose palate was dry from thirst, asked him for water. Purport. The king, being thirsty, asked the sage for water. That such a great devotee and king asked for water from a sage absorbed in trance was certainly providential. Otherwise, there was no chance of such a unique happening. Maharaj Parikshit was thus placed in an awkward position so that gradually Srimad Bhagavatam could be revealed.
Text 28. The king, not received by any formal welcome by means of being offered a seat, place, water, and sweet addresses, considered himself neglected, and so thinking, he became angry. Purport. So basically, Maharaj Parikshit wasn't received by this rishi, by this muni, in which should have been a proper way. So therefore, he became angry, which is another disposition that is unbecoming of pure devotee. Purport. The law of reception in the codes of the Vedic principle states that even if an enemy is received at home, he must be received with all respects. He should not be given a chance to understand that he has come into the house of an enemy. When Lord Krishna, accompanied by Arjuna and Bhima, approached Jarasandha in Magadha, the respectable enemies were given a royal reception by King Jarasandha. The guest's enemy, namely Bhima, was to fight with Jarasandha, and yet they were given a grand reception. At night they used to sit down together as friends and guests, and in the day they used to fight, risking life and death. That was the law of reception. The reception law enjoins that a poor man who has nothing to offer his guests should be good enough to offer a straw mat for sitting, a glass of water for drinking, and some sweet words. Basically, anybody can at least offer a seat, some water, and a few kind words. Therefore, to receive a guest, either friend or foe, there is no expense. It is only a question of good manners.
When Maharaj Parikshit entered the door of Shamika Rishi, he did not expect a royal reception by the Rishi because he knew that saints and rishis are not materially rich men. But he never expected that in a seat of straw, a glass of water and some sweet words would be denied to him. He was not an ordinary guest, nor was he an enemy of the Rishi, and therefore the cold reception by the Rishi astonished the king greatly. As a matter of fact, the king was right to get angry with the Rishi when he needed a glass of water very badly. To become angry in such a grave situation was not unnatural for the king, but because the king himself was not less than a great saint, his becoming angry and taking action were astonishing. So it must be accepted that it was so ordained by the supreme will of the Lord. The king was a great devotee of the Lord, and the saint was also as good as the king. But by the will of the Lord, the circumstances were so created that they became ways to the king's becoming unattached to family, connection and governmental activities, and thus becoming a completely surrendered soul unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. The merciful Lord sometimes creates such awkward positions for his pure devotees in order to drag them towards himself from the mire of material existence. But outwardly the situations appear to be frustrating to the devotees. The devotees of the Lord are always under the protection of the Lord, and in any condition, frustration or success, the Lord is the supreme guide for the devotees. The pure devotees therefore accept all conditions of frustration as blessings from the Lord.
Blessings. Okay. Yeah. Blessings, but where's the Lord taking you? That's the point. He may create a frustrating situation, but like with Maharaj Parikshit, it was for a higher purpose, and he was about to die in 7 days. But how do we know? How do we know what the Lord has in store for us and why he's creating such situations? What do you think?
I reserve comment, we read further.
Okay, text 29. O Brahmanas, the circumstances have distressed him with extreme hunger and thirst. The king directed toward the sage his anger and envy, which he had never before directed toward a Brahmana. Purport. For a king like Maharaj Parikshit to become angry and envious, especially at a sage and Brahmana, was undoubtedly unprecedented. The king knew well that Brahmanas, sages, children, women, and old men are always beyond the jurisdiction of punishment. Similarly, the king, even though he commits a great mistake, is never to be considered a wrongdoer. So we have two apparently contradictory understandings of etiquette. Kshatriya should never insult the Brahmana, but at the same time, the king should never be neglected. So there you go, what are you going to do? Or rather, what does it say? The king, even though he commits a great mistake, is never to be considered a wrongdoer. But in this case, Maharaj Parikshit became angry and envious at the sage due to his thirst and hunger by the will of the Lord. The king was right to punish his subject for coldly receiving him or neglecting him, but because the culprit was a sage and a Brahmana, it was unprecedented. As the Lord is never envious of anyone, so also the Lord's devotee is never envious of anyone. The only justification for Maharaj Parikshit's behaving is that it was ordained by the Lord.
Text 30. While leaving, the king, being so insulted, picked up a lifeless snake with his bow and angrily placed it on the shoulder of the sage. Then he returned to his palace. Purport. The king thus treated the sage tit for tat, although he was never accustomed to such silly actions. By the will of the Lord, the king, while going away, found a dead snake in front of him, and he thought that the sage who had coldly received him thus might be coldly rewarded by being offered a garland of a dead snake. In the ordinary course of dealing, this was not very unnatural, but in the case of Maharaj Parikshit's dealing with a Brahmana sage, this was certainly unprecedented. It so happened by the will of the Lord.
Keeps repeating, this is all happening by the will of the Lord, but in the process, I doubt if anyone really understood it was happening by the will of the Lord. And it's even hard to see that it's happening by the will of the Lord. But the Acharyas say that it is, so we understand that it is. Translation of 31. Upon returning, he began to contemplate and argue within himself whether the sage had actually been in meditation with senses concentrated and eyes closed, or whether he had just been feigning trance just to avoid receiving a lower kshatriya. This is a good sign that King Parikshit, after leaving, he became introspective and he was thinking, I wonder if I had the right interpretation of the situation. Purport. The king, being a devotee of the Lord, did not approve of his own action, and thus he began to wonder whether the sage was really in a trance or was just pretending in order to avoid receiving the king, who was a kshatriya and therefore lower in rank. Repentance comes in the mind of a good soul as soon as he commits something wrong. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Srila Jiva Goswami do not believe that the king's action was due to his past misdeeds. The arrangement was so made by the Lord just to call the king back home, back to Godhead.
According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, the plan was made by the will of the Lord, and by the will of the Lord the situation of frustration was created. The plan was that for his so-called misdeed, the king could be cursed by an inexperienced Brahmana boy infected by the influence of Kali. And thus the king would leave his hearth and home for good. His connections to Srila Sukadeva Goswami would enable the presentation of the great Srimad Bhagavatam, which is considered to be the book incarnation of the Lord. This book incarnation of the Lord gives much fascinating information of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, like his Ras Leela with the spiritual cowherd damsels of Vrajabhumi. This specific pastime of the Lord has a special significance because anyone who properly learns about this particular pastime of the Lord will certainly be dissuaded from mundane sex desire and be placed on the path of sublime devotional service to the Lord. The pure devotee's mundane frustration is meant to elevate the devotee to a higher transcendental position. By placing Arjuna and the Pandavas in frustration due to the intrigue of their cousin brothers, the prelude of the Battle of Kurukshetra was created by the Lord. This was to incarnate the sound representative of the Lord, Bhagavad Gita. So by placing King Parikshit in an awkward position, the incarnation of Srimad Bhagavatam was created by the will of the Lord. Being distressed by hunger and thirst was only a show, because the king endured much even in the womb of his mother. He was never disturbed by the glaring heat of the Brahmastra released by Ashwatthama. The king's distressed condition was certainly unprecedented. The devotees like Maharaj Parikshit are powerful enough to forbear such distresses by the will of the Lord, and they are never disturbed. The situation in this case was therefore all planned by the Lord.
Text 32. I guess we'll finish with this, huh?
Oops. Blessings from the Debbie goats.
Isaac Newton discovered gravity, or identified gravity. Just fell from the sky.
It's the demigods.
Text 32. The sage had a son who was very powerful, being a Brahmana's son. While he was playing with inexperienced boys, he heard of his father's distress, which was occasioned by the king. Then and there, the boy spoke as follows. We're going to leave you with a cliffhanger, so you'll have to watch the next session. But we're going to read the purport. Due to Maharaj Parikshit's good government, even a boy of tender age who was playing with other inexperienced boys could become as powerful as a qualified Brahmana. This boy was known as Shringi, and he achieved good training in brahmacharya by his father so that he could be as powerful as a Brahmana, even at that age. But because the age of Kali was seeking an opportunity to spoil the cultural heritage of the four orders of life, the inexperienced boy gave a chance for the age of Kali to enter into the field of Vedic culture. Hatred of the lower orders of life began from this Brahmana boy under the influence of Kali, and thus cultural life began to dwindle day by day. The first victim of Brahminical injustice was Maharaj Parikshit, and thus the protection given by the king against the onslaught of Kali was slackened. So join us for the next reading, where we'll hear what Shringi, the Brahmin boy, said.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Grant our Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai.
Thank you all very much. Bye-bye. Haribol.